Have you ever picked up your phone to do one thing and then put it down 45 minutes later and you still haven't done everything, or you've done everything except that one thing that you picked it up to do? Or you opened it to check the time, and yet somehow you ended up in a comment section, then a video, then 4 more videos, and then a group chat that hadn't moved in 3 days, but now all of a sudden has 27 new messages, and you still have no idea what time it is. Most of us have been there more times than we would like to admit. Because here's the thing about screen time. We know that it's a lot. We're just not always sure we want to know exactly how much. 7 hours seems different when it's broken down into categories. Right? 2 hours on social media, 4 hours on YouTube, and an hour of, well, you can't even account for that hour. And none of that is evil. None of it is. None of it's even surprising, right? You're a human being living in a world that's designed to keep you scrolling. Every app on your phone was engineered by a team of people whose entire job is to make sure that you don't put it down. But here's where it gets more complicated. Most of us aren't just fighting distraction. We're fighting the pull towards content that we know somewhere in the back of our mind is not leading us anywhere good. Maybe it starts as boredom, a mistyped search, a suggested video, a rabbit hole that starts innocent and ends somewhere you didn't plan to go. And somewhere along the way, a line got crossed that you didn't even see coming. And now you're carrying something. It could be guilt or a habit that you haven't told anyone about. Maybe it's just this low-level buzz of knowing that what's filling your mind isn't what you would want anyone else to see. Right? Have you ever felt like that? Like the version of you that exists online, or at least the version that exists while you're alone with your phone at night, is a different person than who you are in the daylight. Right? That gap is real. And you're not the only one who feels it. The last few weeks in our series, Like, Follow, and Describe, we have been building towards this, towards tonight. We've talked about who you actually are online and why it matters. We've talked about what real connection looks like beyond the screen. And we've talked about being a light in the digital darkness. Tonight is where all of that comes to a head. Because being who God made you to be online, finding real connection, being light, none of that is possible if your relationship with your screen is running you instead of the other way around. Balance means knowing when to unplug. And not just unplugging from the clock, but from the content that's quietly shaping who you are becoming. And here's what's worth knowing before we go any further tonight. Jesus lived in a world of constant demand. People pulling at him from every direction, needs that never stopped, noise that never quit. And he had something to say about how to survive that without losing yourself. Before we look at what Jesus said, let's set the scene. Mark is one of the shortest gospels and probably the oldest. It was most likely written by a man named John Mark. And here's an AI rendering of what he might look like. He was a close companion to the Apostle Peter. Many historians believe that Mark essentially wrote down Peter's firsthand account of following Jesus, which means that if we read Mark, it's like we're reading eyewitness material. Peter was there for almost everything. But what stands out about the Gospel of Mark is the pace. Things happen fast. Mark uses the word immediately over and over. Jesus heals someone and immediately he goes to the next town, then immediately calls the next disciple, then immediately casts out another demon. There's an urgency that makes you feel like you are just running, trying to run just to keep up. Which makes this moment that we're about to read even more striking. Because in the middle of all of that momentum, Jesus stops. Here's the context. Jesus and his disciples had just returned from sending the 12 out in pairs to preach and to heal. They've been doing ministry on their own for the first time, and it went really well. People were coming from everywhere. The crowds were so thick that Jesus and his disciples couldn't even find time to eat. And into that chaos, Jesus said something that nobody expected. Mark chapter 6, verse 31. Then Jesus said, and he's talking to his disciples, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. All right, let that sink in for a second. Jesus, who had the power to heal anyone, he fed thousands, he calmed storms with a word, chose to stop. Not because the need went away. The need was still very much there. People were still coming. They were still asking. They were still hurting. But he stopped anyway. Because Jesus understood something that we often forget. That you cannot pour from an empty cup. Right? You cannot pour from an empty cup. Even he, Jesus, the God of the universe in human form, built rhythms of withdrawal and rest into his life. And not as a reward for finishing anything, as a practice, as a discipline, something he returned to on purpose. And then there's this from another one of the most famous passages in Scripture, Psalm chapter 46. Look at this. Be still and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. This psalm was written in the middle of a crisis. In the verses before what we just read, the earth is described as giving way, as mountains falling into the sea, nations in chaos. And right in the middle of that, God says, be still. Not when things calm down. Not after the crisis passes. Now. Stillness isn't the absence of noise. It's a decision you make in the presence of it. It's a way of saying, I'm not God. I don't have to hold everything together. I can stop right here because he is in control. That's the same thing Jesus modeled in Mark chapter 6. And it's the same thing that he is inviting you into right now. So the question is, what does that look like when your phone is the noise? When the content that's shaping your mind never stops until you stop it. And we'll get into that, but first, let's look at what these passages mean for us. Because there's three things here that I don't want us to miss. The first one is something Jesus modeled so clearly that it's easy to just look right past it. Number one tonight is this. Rest is not a reward, it's a rhythm. Look at the moment Jesus chose to pull away. He and the disciples had just seen real results. Right? Ministry was working. People were being healed. The 12 came back with stories, and the crowd kept coming. More and more people, so much that they couldn't even stop to eat. Well, that's exactly the moment that you would think Jesus would just push through, that he would keep going, that he would finish the work, that he would sleep when it's done. Jesus didn't rest because he thought he'd earned it. He rested because he knew what happens to people who never stop. He built rhythms of withdrawal into his life on purpose, not as a break from work or from school, but as a part of it. And what Mark 6 is showing us is that the noise of constant demand, even good and productive demand, will empty you if you never stop. Rest wasn't weakness for Jesus. It was wisdom. And he's modeling something here that he clearly thought his disciples needed to see. The second thing tonight is this: chaos shapes us more than we think. Psalm 46 was written in a moment of chaos. Mountains falling, nations in uproar, and in the middle of all that, God says, "Be still and know that I am God." Notice what stillness produces. Knowing, a clarity that comes from stillness that noise simply crowds out. And now think about what the average teenager lets into their mind every single day, or in a single day. Videos, chats, social feeds, music, gaming, more videos. Most of it is harmless, right? We talked about that. Some of it is not. And here's where we have to be honest with each other. Some of you are regularly watching content that you know isn't leading you anywhere good. Maybe it started out as a curiosity. Maybe it showed up uninvited and you kept going back. Maybe it's pornography. Maybe it's something else entirely. But you know what it is. And you know there's a gap between who you are in that moment and who you actually want to be. Here's what the research tells us and what the Bible has been saying all along. What you feed into your mind shapes your mind. It shapes what you expect from relationships. It shapes how you see other people. It shapes what you want. You are not watching content and staying the same. Nobody is. Psalms 46 says, "Be still and know God." You cannot know God fully if your mind is constantly full of content that points in the opposite direction. The noise is forming you. The question is whether it's forming you toward the person God made you to be or away from them. Which brings us to our third thing. Number 3, God sees you and he's not done with you. Here's what I want to make absolutely clear before we move on. If you are sitting here tonight carrying something, a habit you can't shake, content that you keep going back to, a pattern that you have tried to break and failed, this is not a message tonight designed to make you feel worse about yourself. Right? You don't need more shame, and shame never once helped anyone become the person they want to be. What God offers is something different. He sees exactly where you are right now. The real version, the late night version, the version with your phone when nobody else is watching. He sees all of it, and he has not moved. He's not waiting for you to become clean or to clean yourself up before he'll have anything to do with you. He sees you right where you are, and he offers you something better. Forgiveness for what you've done and actual freedom from what's been holding you back. That's the whole story of the gospel. The same Jesus who pulled away to rest in Mark 6 is the same Jesus who turned toward people everyone else had written off. He doesn't give up on you when your screen time report is embarrassing. He doesn't love you any less because you've gone back to the same thing over and over and over again. He's not surprised by any of it. He just wants to lead you to somewhere better. And that starts with being honest about about where you actually are. So let's talk about what we can actually do about all of this. Because there's a difference between sitting in these blue chairs and actually living it out. So here's 3 challenges I have for you tonight, and we're done. The first is this: build one rhythm of stillness. This doesn't have to be complicated, right? Jesus pulled away from the noise on purpose, and you can too. I challenge you to pick one time each day to put your phone somewhere that you won't reach for it automatically. And before you do, you ask God a simple question: what do you want me to hear right now that the noise has been drowning out? It could be 10 minutes in the morning before you even open your phone or open any apps. It could be the last 10 minutes of the day before you go to sleep instead of scrolling. It doesn't matter when. What matters is that it's the same time every day when your phone is out of reach and you've actually asked God to speak in the quiet. You're practicing what Jesus modeled, and that's the point. Over time, that stillness starts to do something. It changes what you hear, it changes what you want, and it changes how you see everything else. The second thing is have the honest conversation. Many of us are carrying something we haven't told anyone about. A habit that we keep going back to. Content that we keep watching. A pattern that we have tried to break on our own and we can't. And if we're honest, we've probably even brought it to God more than once, and we've meant it every single time, but it keeps coming back. Well, here's what's missing. God didn't design us to heal in isolation. He designed us to heal in community. Bringing it to one trusted person changes something that prayer alone hasn't been able to shift. And I'm not talking and saying that prayer isn't worth it. What I'm saying is secrecy is part of what keeps the cycle going. The moment it stops being a secret is the moment that it stops losing its grip on you. I challenge you to find one person that you actually trust, a parent, a small group leader, a friend who takes their faith seriously, and tell them what you have been carrying. You don't have to have it figured out before you have the conversation. You just have to be willing to say it out loud to someone who cares. And I'm not saying this has to be a public confession like in our small groups or anything. No, this is an honest, private conversation with one trusted person. God designed healing to be this way. One honest conversation with a safe person. And I know that this kind of honesty can be scary, but you start to finally feel some relief from the burden you've been carrying, and you'll wonder why you carried it for so long. The third thing tonight is this. Number 3, walk towards something else. If you've identified the content that you need to walk away from, walking away is the right call. But here's where most people get it wrong. They just try to stop. They white knuckle it. They cold turkey it, if you will. And it works for a few days, but then they're right back to where they were. Jesus didn't just pull away from the crowd. He pulled towards something. A quiet place, a time with the Father. A withdrawal was purposeful. He knew where he was going before he left. So I challenge you, ask God an honest question. Is there something that I keep consuming that's getting in the way of what you want to do with me? And then give God room to answer. And if something comes to mind, you ask him what you want him to replace it with. A specific thing. Something that you'll actually do. Say like a playlist that points towards him. A conversation that you've been putting off. A chapter of something worth reading. Whatever it is, Write it down, because an empty space doesn't stay empty for long, and you want to have already decided with God what's going in there. And then tell someone what you're doing so it's real. So there's one person in your life who can ask you how it's going 2 weeks later and actually knows what they are asking about. But here's the thing. None of these steps are easy. None of it's easy. But here's what I want you to know as we head into our small groups. Jesus didn't pull away from the noise because he had it all figured out. He pulled away because the quiet was where he found what the noise drowned out. That's the invitation. One rhythm, one conversation, one honest conversation, one decision to walk towards something better and leave the rest behind. You don't have to do any of that alone. In just a moment, we'll head to our small groups, and I want to encourage you to use that time to take your first step. But before we do that, let's pray.